It seems like every time I open a device, I see some doomsday headline about how horrible the ski industry is, how big corporate ruined the industry and how its downfall might be inevitable, how skiing is a waste of time and money, and so on. So I want to set a couple things straight. There are dozens of things wrong in the ski industry, and to break them all down in one video would take time that none of y'all really have. So instead, we're going to focus on what's arguably the biggest, most dreaded aspect of skiing nowadays: the crowds. We'll have videos breaking down climate change, traffic, and other things throughout the next few years. But for now, let's start by looking at those dreaded skiing crowds and lines. Welcome to the SRG Skiing Breakdown of the ski industry's people problem. So let's start by introducing the problem. People want to ski. A lot of people. After the 2020 pandemic, a lot of people had a realization of sorts, and outdoor activities got more popular than ever. That was reflected in the ski industry, with these post-COVID ski seasons being the busiest in history. According to the National Ski Areas Association, the 2020-21 season was the 8th busiest of all time, the 21-22 season was 2nd busiest, this last season, 23-24, was 5th busiest, and the 2022-2023 ski season was the busiest of all time, totaling out at a whopping 65.387 million skier visits. For reference, throughout the 2 decades previous, the average was just over 55 million per season. But, as I just mentioned, that record season was 2 seasons ago. Last season represented a significant step back, with nearly 5 million skier visits less than the season prior. So does that signify a one-off season, with the media scaring people from going skiing, or does it represent the beginning of an overall trend? In other words, is crowding starting to go away, or was last season just a fluke? The answer to the question presented in the previous section is rather convoluted, and could necessitate its own video about more economic-related topics. We're not going to go into the business side of things, but rather stick with what us, the consumers, are seeing on our end. If you want to learn more about the economics and business side of the current state of the industry, check out this video from our friends over at Peak Rankings in the top right of your screen now. So just what are ski resorts doing to combat overcrowding? That in itself is also convoluted, but we've identified 4 major things that are fairly common across the whole of the industry. Let's go break them down one by one. The first thing we've seen through this post-COVID boom is a simultaneous boom in terrain expansions and proposals. And it makes sense. With an expansion, you add more trails and often more lifts. The more of that you have, the more space you have to spread people out. Lots of these expansions that have been built have been in the works for decades, but finally got the push they needed to get done with the most recent headlines, videos, stories, and overall negative press. Since the pandemic, we've seen major expansions at Beaver Creek, Aspen Mountain, Steamboat, Sugarloaf, Loon, Grand Targhee, and Keystone, just to name a few. We've also seen proposals, approvals, and first steps taken for expansion at resorts like Schweitzer, Monarch, Lake Louise, and even Winter Park. And all that's not even to mention Deer Valley's massive Expanded Excellence initiative, which will have a limited opening this season and a full opening next season. The major takeaway from this is that ski resorts are doing their best to get bigger. It's a very difficult and time-consuming process, which in itself deserves its own video, but the short story is, the ski industry recognizes that expanding terrain can and will help spread people out and diminish the crowding that we all dread. Something else we're seeing quite commonly is resorts and multi-mountain corporations investing in new infrastructure. The most commonly heralded of these are new lifts, but other factors, such as new on-mountain lodges, ticket office, or rental centers, can also help streamline things and make the crowds more manageable or spread out. For now, let's really focus on the lifts. There are 3 different types of new lifts being built each year. The first are those that serve expansions, an all-new lift in an all-new location serving all-new terrain. We can skip over those since we just broke that down. The second are infill lifts. These are lifts that serve existing terrain but in a new alignment. 2 examples of this are Breckenridge's Freedom Superchair and Sun Valley's Flying Squirrel. The idea of an infill lift is to increase lift capacity in an area where the current capacity isn't ample. They can also be used to facilitate navigation, ease access to specific areas, and/or supersede catwalks. For Breckenridge's case, the independent Superchair used to get massive lines, so by adding Freedom, they increased capacity on Peak 7, decreasing lines at Independence. There is, however, a downside to this. While you may not be waiting in line quite as long anymore, the runs on Peak 7 now feel much more crowded, owing to the nearly double capacity now feeding the trails. Terrain expansions are the best option, as they allow for more lift capacity while also adding trail capacity. Infill lifts add lift capacity, but typically not trail capacity, so when resorts choose to build an infill lift, it's not until after careful study and research to ensure that trail crowding won't be an issue. Sometimes resorts get it wrong, but for the most part, infill lifts are another tool we're seeing resorts use to mitigate crowds. Of course, by and large the most common type of new lift is a pure replacement. This is a lift in the same alignment as an old lift, serving the same trails as the old lift, but is some combination of newer, higher capacity, and faster. Nowadays, a lot of these new lifts are built just due to a combination of old age or some sort of mechanical failure on the part of the old lift. However, another big factor in these direct replacements is, again, capacity. Resorts want more people getting up the mountain. The more people per chair and the faster the interval between chairs, the less time guests spend waiting in line. This type of new lift also comes with certain risks of trail crowding. However, these can also serve as important tools in reducing crowds. Taos's Lift 4 is a good example of this, as it, along with reducing ride times, increased capacity and decreased wait times on the backside of the mountain. These are quite common, and there's a reason. They work. For their level of effectiveness, direct lift replacements are the most efficient, requiring the least amount of research, approval, and ultimately, money. Hence, they're a very powerful tool for resorts to combat crowding. Now, this category wasn't just lifts. I said infrastructure as a whole. So let's discuss, for a brief moment, things that are not lifts. Over the past years, many resorts have massively redeveloped or expanded their base areas. This creates more places to stay, more shops, more services, and more restaurants, spreading people out more, which diminishes crowds or at least makes it feel a bit nicer. The same goes for on-mountain facilities. Take, for example, the Airy at Copper Mountain. The Airy is a huge improvement, tripling the size of the restaurant at the top of American Eagle. It's a huge upgrade over the old Solitude Station, where it took forever to get food and was nearly impossible to find seating. Even if it draws in slightly more people, it's way more spacious and feels less crowded. These types of things are big investments by resorts that are rarely noticed. A lot of people like to complain that the ski resorts aren't actually doing anything to help with crowds, but the evidence of recent investment both in lifts and other facilities over the past few years is inarguable. Another tool that a lot of resorts are starting to employ are parking reservations. These are typically only required on peak days, those being weekends and the holiday periods, and on the close-in or most favorable parking lots. Going hand in hand with this, most resorts are requiring payment for certain lots. While the latter is arguably just a cash grab, which I'm not going to debate here, the former is a way of managing the number of cars at the resort, which in turn, for the most part, limits the number of people who can go to the resort on a given day. Arapahoe Basin just started requiring reservations for all of its parking lots on peak days. This is the early riser parking lot, which fills early and consistently. In previous seasons, this and other lots would all fill, and people would be parking dangerously and illegally on the highway. So while the expected visitation would be X due to the parking lot capacity, there would end up being X plus 500 actual visitors. By requiring reservations, the capacity of the resort becomes the capacity of the lots. There won't be any extras coming from God knows where down the highway. The capacity will be known, and can therefore be planned for and dealt with. Another element of Arapahoe Basin's parking scheme is that it doesn't apply on weekdays. This incentivizes those who can to go midweek. The theme we've been discussing all video is spreading people out. Before, it was physically spreading people out, but through parking and what we'll talk about next, resorts are also trying to spread people out across different days, rather than nobody coming Monday through Friday, and then everybody coming on Saturday and Sunday. They make it easier to come on a weekday because you don't have to have that advanced preparation. And of course, a lot of resorts charge less for parking on less busy days, or in A Basin's case, don't charge at all midweek. This is a smaller scale operation in the example of A Basin, but you can get the gist of how this is another good tool that resorts can utilize to help mitigate crowds. Know exactly how many people you can have, and how many people are going to come, and plan accordingly. Make it annoying for people who want to come on the weekend, make it easy to come midweek. Make it expensive to come on the weekend, make it cheap to come midweek. Just another tool in the belt. Another major strategy we've seen resorts using lately has been a handful of different tactics regarding tickets and passes. The first is limiting ticket sales. This is pretty self-explanatory. Not many resorts do true limits nowadays, as it was more of a COVID countermeasure, but it is still a tool at Mountains' disposal. Limiting is only so effective, as a large majority of visitors have multi-mountain passes, so the limits don't apply to them. However, there are 3 tools that can be used for those big passes. One is day limits, another is blackout dates, and a third is reservations. For example, skiers with the Icon Pass only get 7 days at the Aspens and have to reserve their days in advance. At a certain point, if the point is ever reached, which it often isn't, they'll stop allowing Icon reservations for that day, which allows them to limit the amount of Icon Pass holders on their mountains on any given day. And it prevents someone from getting an Icon Pass and spending an entire month at the resort, which helps spread people out throughout the season. Those with lower tiers of passes won't be able to ski at certain mountains in the week between Christmas and New Year's, MLK Day weekend, and President's Day weekend. Those are the busiest days of the year, so the goal of that strategy is to get less people skiing on those days and more people skiing on the less busy days, spreading people out and diminishing the crowds. Now, because resorts don't often fully employ ticket sale limits, they need to have some other way to incentivize midweek and off-peak skiing. They do this through marketing, of course, but another way they do this is through dynamic pricing. Oftentimes, buying a lift ticket on a February Saturday will cost over double of what midweek skiing will. For example, skiing midweek in November at Purgatory in southwest Colorado can cost as little as $11. Lots of resorts and corporations offer pass deals where you can only ski midweek, but the passes cost a fraction of a normal season or multi-mountain pass. Something else you might sometimes see is reservations required for lift tickets. In other words, you can't just show up and buy a lift ticket day of. This is to allow resorts to know how many people are coming and prepare adequately, and to force people to plan in advance so the mountain doesn't get overwhelmed with spontaneous visitors on powder days and such. Overall, resorts are trying to limit the amount of guests on the hill on those busy peak season days and incentivize more people to go on the less busy midweek and off-peak days. There's lots of different ways to do this, and there are lots of widely implemented strategies you'll see across the industry. Skiing is here to stay. That doesn't mean it's not changing, however. We're seeing real investments and real effort by resorts to make the skiing experience better for everyone. Everyone has the right to experience the magic of the mountains. Unfortunately, that means that a lot of people are going skiing. More people, more traffic, more crowds, more lines. But resorts have the capacity to handle all of that. They need to spread people out, both geographically and time-wise. They have lots of strategies to do so, and while many aren't popular among the diehards, they do display an unwavering commitment to make the experience better. Say what you will about resorts' incentives to make it better, but at the end of the day, we're seeing evidence that they're trying. They don't want crowding to be a big part of your day, and neither do you. It'll take some time before we start seeing real results, but things are changing. Skiing is not dead, and it is changing for the better. That seems to wrap it up for our breakdown of how ski resorts are handling the people problem. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please consider subscribing to support this dream. As always, any questions and suggestions are welcome down below. Thank you all so much for watching. All my love, I'm out.